Fall is the perfect time, in my opinion, for dark academia. So if you're not aware of dark academia, it's this literary style that is really based in intellectualism. So it's usually at a boarding school or a college setting, and there's usually some kind of somber or morose plot lines that are going on in it. And it's also wearing plaid and kind of having this sartorial style that is sweaters and boots. And it really just dives into that autumnal aesthetic. And so while I see a lot of recommendations for dark academia for adults and even young adults, as well as books and movies, I wanted to share some of my favorite middle grades that could be dark academia, but because they're middle grade, they're more gray academia or lighter academia. So I'm going to share a list of 15 books, and I have them organized starting with a mystery kind of theme that's in it, and that's really your more solid dark academia world. But because it's middle grade and because I love fantasy, I'm also going to share some that have magic in them. So kind of blurring the lines here, but really trying to give you an overall picture of some great fall light academia books for middle grade. One thing to note in these recommendations is I have read about half of them, but I've done a lot of research on them to feel pretty confident in being able to include them in this list as books that you could try for light academia. So I will try to mention which ones I've read and which ones are on my TBR. So the first one that I wanted to mention is Mrs. Smith's Spy School for Girls by Beth McMullen. This is on Scribd if you have a subscription to that service. So this is one that is on my TBR that I have not yet read, but my understanding is at the beginning of the book, basically, you realize that this boarding school is a front for an espionage training school for girls. And our main character is Abigail, and she is searching for her missing mother. What makes this book lovable, I think it gets really good reviews on Goodread, is that it is action-packed, and so for your middle grade readers, the plot really does drive you through the story. And I think it's also funny, and it's got this strong female character in Abigail, and then with the setting in an espionage boarding school, it is a perfect light academia read. Next is Wakestone Hall by Judith Rossell. This is actually the third book in a series. The first one is Withering by the Sea, and there's also a second one as well. It's kind of this Victorian setting for a girl who is solving mysteries. And the third one is Wakestone Hall, and so they are kind of in this dreary boarding school setting in that book. So our main character is Stella Montgomery, and I think through living in this boarding school, she just comes across these situations where she needs to figure out what's going on and not only save herself but save others. I think there is a nefarious character who is out to do harm to them, and she's just very resilient of a character, and having this being set in the Victorian era just lends and adds to that light academia feeling. Next is City Spies by James Ponti. This is very popular. It is a series. It is also very action-packed. And in the first book, we follow Brooklyn, who is from New York City. The premise here is that these kids are kind of collected by a man who runs an espionage school in Scotland. And they are kids who are orphans. They have typically been, suffered some sort of abuse and neglect. And they kind of form this ultra secret espionage group, and they are able to take down, or attempt to take down, very large criminal rings. And while there's not a lot of setting in the school, especially not in the first one, I just love the idea of a boarding school that has regular classes as well as espionage classes that's set in Scotland. The idea of it is enough for you to kind of feel immersed in that setting, and really does give this kind of gray academia. We're in Scotland, which is, you know, if you're looking at that plaid part of dark academia, that really fits the bill. And the other thing that's great is because it's a series, it does have this string throughout it of you solve the mysteries in each book, but there's an ongoing mystery that you have to continue to kind of try to unravel. It doesn't just follow one of the kids. There's, you know, each book is kind of a focus on a different child, and so you just get different perspectives, and it's a really great audio version as well on Scribd. Next, this is actually one that I do have. It is The Mystery of Black Hollow Lane by Julia Nobel, and this follows Emmy, who is going to Wellsworth. Her mother has sent her to this boarding school in England. She really doesn't have a close relationship with her mother. It's really strained, and her father is missing. And so she attends this school, and she starts to see a group of kids that seem to be going off into a different area of the school. And by following them, she discovers the Secret Order of Black Hollow, I think is what it's called. And so she is eventually at some point trying to figure out what happened to her dad. She thinks there's a connection there, but it is just so immersive with this school. I mean, you really do get a feel for how the school is laid out, what it feels like. There's some scary scenes in like these dark rooms that have these like old stone walls. And I mean, you can just see, it's just perfect. There is a nod, I think, to Harry Potter on the back, but it really is not, there's not magic or anything in it. So it is a phenomenal read. Okay, next on the list of books that don't really have a lot of magic in them, they're mostly just mystery, and that is Murder Most Unladylike by Robin Stevens. This is the Wells and Wong mystery series, and I actually jumped into, I think, a Christmas one last year with no problem. Like, you don't need to read them in order or anything. The premise here is that Daisy and Hazel are like this Sherlock Holmes duo where they solve mysteries, and there are some mysteries that follow them, like some like murders and all kinds of things, obviously by the title. But it is set at the Deep Dean School for most of them. The one I read, they actually left Deep Dean, their boarding school, and went to a college setting. But either way, it really seems to stick in that dark academia vein of being in a boarding school and having a murder and a mystery that needs to be solved. And I will say this, I think that it gets better as you go along. In the beginning, there were some unlikable parts of the character, especially in my opinion for Daisy Wells. And maybe it's supposed to be that way, where you just kind of are getting to know the character and you like one better than the other. Maybe the author intended that, but it can kind of detract from it. But that could also be just my adult perspective. Bloomability by Sharon Creech is your coming of age light academia book. So we follow Dinny, who is raised in this rural, mostly uneducated family, but she has the chance to go to a boarding school in Switzerland because her aunt and uncle are running the school. And so she goes to this school and kind of discovers this whole other world outside of this rural life that she had, and makes friends with international students who are also at this school in Lugano, Switzerland. If you've read any Sharon Creech, you can imagine it is your typical coming of age story. There is a trigger warning, there is a tragedy at the end, and you know, the students in the school have to really work through their grief surrounding that, but it really does fit the bill for this boarding school. It's in a cold climate. She's really struggling with loneliness and grief from leaving her family, and if you just want your straight run-of-the-mill boarding school tale without magic and mystery, Bloomability is a great match for that. Okay, so next I'm going to continue in that dark academia theme here, except I'm going to pull in a thread of magic. So the first one that I wanted to share is Ordinary Magic by Caitlin Rubino-Bradway. This is the story of Abby Hale. You can see her on the cover. Again, I love this background of the boarding school. I mean, it's just so perfect with the socks and the skirt, and it's just very much a light academia feel. But Abby Hale is a young girl. She lives in a society where when you come to the age of, I think, 13 or close to that, you come into your magical powers, and she did not. And so that turns her into an Ord, which I guess is like short for ordinary. And so her process of school and learning is totally different than most of the kids in her society. So I have not yet read this, but I will say one thing that the reviews talked a lot about is the bullying and the poor treatment of the Ords, because they're not magical. There really is this like caste system, and they're at the bottom of it, so she's not treated very well. And so that is a theme running through this, but I did love the idea of a different perspective, because most of our characters in our middle grade light academia magic books, they are the ones who need to save everyone, and her skills right now are such that she's kind of at the bottom end here and doesn't have the skills that she would need. Next is Nevermoor by Jessica Townsend. This is so well known, but I did want to mention it in case you haven't read it. It's such a great book. People, I think, compare it to Harry Potter. I really don't think they should. I think it's totally different. But this is the story of Morrigan Crow, who again, at that 13 age, she's going to come to an end. That by midnight at a certain date on her birthday, she's being sacrificed, basically, for lack of a better word. And it turns out that is not true. She ends up going to the School for Wondrous Arts, which is a magical society. And she also has to unravel this huge mystery. And there is magic, but I would say there's a lot more mystery in it. It has a great twist at the end. It's a series, and it has a cult-like following. So if you haven't tried Nevermoor, I would highly recommend it. Next is Hooky by M Bonastre-Tur. This is a graphic novel, and again, it kind of turns the narrative up on its end in that you've got two twins, Danny and Dorian, and they missed their bus to magic school, and now they are wanted because it's like they've gone AWOL. And I think this was created as a webtoon, and people have loved it, and it's, again, really fitting into that dark academia with their clothing and the school setting that of course they missed. But I thought this would be a really great light academia option, especially for any of your middle graders who love graphic novels. Next is Mary and the Little Broomstick, and this is by Mary Stewart, and it is the book that is based on Mary and the Witch's Flower, which is a Studio Ghibli anime movie that, again, has a pretty large following. And the reason why I included this is because Mary, when she discovers this broomstick with magical properties, she ends up being taken to Endor, which is a school of magic. And the broom takes her there, and she is kind of presented as a highly skilled witch. And so that school setting is just beautifully drawn in the movie and is described very well in The Little Broomstick. I did find The Little Broomstick on Scribd, just to make sure that you know that that's one place that you can look for it. And if you can't access the book, the movie from Studio Ghibli, while it does take a different bent, is still a great option. Next is Kelcie Murphy and the Academy of Unbreakable Arts, and that is by Erika Lewis. This is not one that I've read, but the premise here is that Kelcie Murphy, and this is based heavily on Celtic mythology, but Kelcie gets into the Academy for Unbreakable Arts. And I think there's a mystery here where she's not sure why her parents had given her up. She has some pretty strong powers that she is trying to keep hidden. And when she's in the school, she tests into a house where there's like infamous traitors are usually from that house. And so now she's like struggling with that issue as well. It's pretty high fantasy. There's a place called Otherworld, and so it's not just based in our world with magic. I think there is other world building that is going on in this book. Next is Miss Ellicot's School for the Magically Minded, and this is by Sage Blackwood. This is also one that I have not yet read. This follows Chantel as the main character, and her headmistress of her school, who is Miss Ellicot, I think, goes missing. And this is also pretty high magic in that it has dragons and a secret society and sorcery, and so there's a lot of fantasy elements in this story. One of the reasons why I love this is because in her school for the magically minded, they've got classes on spells and potions and wands and summonings and deportment, and they're learning how to protect those who are not magically minded as well. So this is on my TBR. Next is The Marvelers by Dhonielle Clayton, and this follows Ella. Ella is from New Orleans. She's a conjurer, and she is the first conjurer who is being allowed into the Arcanum Training Institute. She ends up befriending kind of the misfits, because being the first conjurer, and again, conjurers are really associated with these like traitorous, infamous people. She kind of gets lumped in with that, and so she's not very popular. Ella hails from New Orleans. Her father is a high up political guy. Her mother is very strong in her conjuring powers, and they have finally gotten the Arcanum Training Institute to accept conjurers, which are her people. And she gets sent to the Arcanum Training Institute as the first conjurer, and so within that kind of political challenges of having someone from a different kind of culture being assimilated into this training institute, her mentor goes missing. Someone escapes from prison and was supposedly helped by other conjurers, so that doesn't help her with being well liked by her peers. And it basically falls on her and her two misfit sidekicks to figure out how to save her mentor and to be able to kind of right the situation where there are people out of prison who really should be in prison. And one of the things that I love so much about this book is the added pieces within it. It's not just in an end paper, it's actually inside the book. So you have a map of the training academy. You have, let me show you, a handbook. There's also star posts, which are like letters that go back and forth, and they put those in there, and they're like printed as part of the book. There's propaganda posters that are posted within here. So it's marked on the spine as book 1. So this is meant to be a series and continue. But having it be at that training institute, there really is a lot of world building around what that training institute is like. There's scenes of her searching in a magical library, just really great light academia aesthetic with this one as well. There's also the Mystwick School of Musicraft, and this, I think I found this for free on Audible. And our main character is Amelia, and the purpose of this school is to learn how to make music to craft magic. Also, I think there are other books within this series as well, but I do love the music school idea of this being like academia, but pulling in those creating magical pieces. Next is the Troubled Girls of Dragomir Academy. This is written by Anne Ursu, and this is the story of Maria, who lives in this really tiny little village, and as her brother is getting tested, because everybody knows he is the skilled child who's destined to become a sorcerer, something happens and it ends up that she gets a letter to this school for troubled girls. The idea of this academy is that these girls are learning how to create magic to help these powerful male sorcerers. And as they're learning it, they discover that the magic that these sorcerers wield is not what they thought it was, and maybe not something that they want to be a part of, and so they've got to figure out how to extricate themselves and save their towns and villages. So I think this one is very feminist in nature, but again, being set in Dragomir Academy, where these girls are kind of sent away to develop on their own, is very dark academia-like. Really quickly, I know this is supposed to be middle school, but I wanted to mention 2 young adult light academia, gray academia options for you as well. So the first one is The Scandalous Sisterhood of Prickwillow Place. This is by Julie Berry, who wrote A Lovely War, which is a really great adult fiction if you are interested in Greek mythology. Anyway, The Scandalous Sisterhood of Prickwillow Place is young adult. It starts right off with a murder, and it is the story of 7 girls who decide to cover up the murder so that they can continue to live at their boarding school. It's pretty slow pacing, so it's not for like your advanced young adult. It's almost for that phase in between your middle grade and your late teens, as long as they can handle the murder parts, which are not super gruesome. They do have to dispose of the body, and there's kind of some humorous scenes about that, but it is a cute read that kind of does span that transition age between late teens and middle grade. And then A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray is another young adult dark academia. I will say that is a much later teen one, just because of the kind of boy-girl interaction. But it is set in a boarding school. That one does have some magical elements to it, some fantasy elements to it, and it follows Gemma Doyle in, it's like the late 1800s, early 1900s. She ends up having to leave her family. I think they're in India, and she goes to a boarding school in England, and there is a huge mystery. It's the same boarding school that her mother went to. Her mother has now passed away, and so there's this figuring out what has happened to her mother at this school that made her mother who Gemma knew that she was, and the fantasy elements of kind of traveling between worlds is in there, and it's a solid YA dark academia novel. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any comments on the books that I've suggested, or have suggestions of your own for light academia, or maybe questions at all about that, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until next time.